All right, folks. Hello and welcome back to online English class. Hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to be completing our analysis of OTN 4, which analyzes the rising action of Marlow's journey, looking specifically at pages 68 through 83, in which Marlow is at the central station. All right. Before we get into finishing up our analysis, let's just quickly run through the top of the week announcements. Remember your discussion grade procedure. Leave a comment with a thoughtful question, a concise summary, or a meaningful reflection on what was discussed. Make sure that you are continuing your reading of Heart of Darkness, Part 2, throughout the course of this week, and completing your OTNs as we complete them in class. Contextualizing all this work is your Quarter 4 essay that you need to keep on your stovetop. Okay, so today we're going to be finishing up OTN 4. All right, so go ahead and find your way back in your notes to OTN 4. Obviously, yesterday we talked about Marlow's relationship with the brickmaker. All right, and the ways in which Marlow's relationship with the brickmaker deepens Marlow's understanding of the darkness or fallenness of the world that is not only inhabited by people who are not as they ought to be, okay, but is also those people inhabit an environment that is not as it ought to be. So misjudging, misrepresenting reality is the rule rather than the exception. It is normal, not different. Okay, so that complicates Marlow's ability, okay, to arrive at a stable notion of the good apart from some kind of honest revelation of the good, some kind of unimpeachably true revelation of the good that he can be sure is genuinely worth living for. Okay, so Marlow obviously is going to continue looking for that. That's why he's in the Congo. In a spiritual sense, right? That's why he's there. Obviously, literally, he's just doing a job, but he views this job as a symbolic pilgrimage or a spiritual journey that is exposing him to kind of existential realities about the world that he lives in, his own heart, and the hearts of the men around him. Okay, so the next point that we want to talk about is Marlow's early impressions of Kurtz, this individual who is introduced and is going to become the sort of central figure or the nexus of the novel as a whole that Marlow is going to engage with, interpret the meaning of, and respond to. Okay, there Kurtz is going to be the inner heart or at the center of the world, at the end of the inner station. Okay, so on page 71, all right, Marlow begins to introduce us to this man Kurtz, who he begins obsessing about. Now, Kurtz's name has already been mentioned throughout the course of the narrative up to this point. The accountant mentioned Kurtz, but basically the dominant impression or the significance of Kurtz is very clearly developed in these passages. Okay, so first of all, Kurtz is the chief of a very important station, and it's in jeopardy because its chief, Mr. Kurtz, is ill. Okay, Kurtz is described as an exceptional man, a man of the greatest importance to the company. Okay, so he is exceptional, which is to say he is different than the other individuals around him. Well, that should be encouraging right off the bat to Marlow. All right, but this impression, all right, is developed. That's not all that they say about Kurtz. All right, this description continues on page 74. All right, not only is Kurtz an exceptional man, all right, he paints this picture that becomes sort of symbolic of a woman draped in a blindfold carrying a lighted torch. Okay, so this kind of torchbearer blindly walking into the darkness, illuminating it, bearing the sacred flame, bearing the sacred fire. Okay, Kurtz is referred to as a quote-unquote prodigy, a quote emissary of pity, like a missionary of pity for the weak, for the broken, of science, okay, of knowledge of one's environment that is scientifically proven and true, of progress, says the brickmaker. Okay, he's a person that will offer the kind of guidance, all right, a kind of higher intelligence, a wide sympathy, a singleness of purpose, all right, to the company. In other words, he is a man described and portrayed as good or virtuous, okay? So, right, if this is true, right, then Marlow has found what he's looking for. He's found a man who knows what is good, Kurtz, and does what is good. A man who is honest. A man who is the person who he is described to be. All right, this illustrates to Marlow, or Kurtz becomes this sort of incarnation or revelation of the possibility of goodness existing and a man being able to pursue and embody that goodness honestly, authentically, truly. All right? So, in that sense, Marlow looks at Kurtz like a Messiah figure or a modern Christ figure. Okay? So, typically, right, the way that a Christ figure or a messianic figure works, all right, so think about this in the Christian tradition, right, you've got this individual who lives in a society or a kingdom in the physical, natural world. And you look around in the world and you look at human history, all right, and you look at the patterns of nature, and what you see, all right, all over is a chaos. Where you long for order, there is chaos. Where you long for just relationships between the powerful and the weak, you see exploitation. You see injustice, both politically speaking, but also existentially speaking. People not getting what they deserve. All of which speaks to the fact that the world is not as it ought to be. That's another word for unjust, is just not as it ought to be. In other words, all right, the individual looks around at the world and recognizes that it is fallen, that it is not as it ought to be. And when an individual reckons with that fallenness and reckons with the fact that though they were created to pursue the good, to know what is true, that pursuing goodness is not only something that they are bad at doing, all right, but knowing what is good is something that they are bad at doing, all right, which complicates that process. In other words, Marlow, very much like, say, the Christian pilgrim, in order to understand the significance of the light, the divine revelation that redeems this chaos, the Messiah who comes to make all things new and unbreak the broken things, all right, Marlow looks at the world and recognizes not only are the people all around him, namely the company, right, doing work that is exploitive, chaotic, morally incoherent, and unjust, and therefore fallen, but also that he is capable and complicit in that fallenness, right? He has not only is externally unjust, but internally is not as he ought to be. He is capable of lying, fraud, manipulation, all evident in his relationship with the brickmaker, all evident, right, in his recognition of the depth of the darkness, the depth of the fallenness of the world that he lives in, which should lead you to the rational question for the person who lives an examined life, okay, who's not just sitting around going, okay, I'm hungry, I eat, I'm thirsty, I drink. For the person who lives the examined life, for the pilgrim, all right, recognition of the depth of the fallenness of the world, recognition that the world is not as it ought to be, and life is not as it ought to be, should be deeply despairing, right? It should lead to despair. It should lead to a kind of hopelessness, right? It's a tragic recognition. But into that fallenness, right, God reveals himself. And God reveals himself through a number of different ways, incarnating eternal truths that redeem this chaos, that promise to right the wrongs of man and to realign the world with his good rule and reign. The way that the Christian individual, all right, now Marlow's not a Christian, but I'm explaining this for a reason. I'm going to get back to Kurtz. The way that the Christian individual typically understands that truth, knows, and is because God invades the physical world and tells it to us, right? And he tells it to us primarily through his incarnations, his manifestations of himself, right? Through the Word, right? Through the Bible, through Jesus, the incarnate Christ, who was crucified and then resurrected, and then through the sustained care of his creatures by the Holy Spirit. All of these are invasions of the world that redeem the chaos and promise to unbreak the brokenness and injustice of the fallen world, right? That gives this person something to what? Live for. Something to hope in. A kind of sacred fire to bear, right? What do you do with this news? You tell people, hey, despite the fact that this world is fallen, despite the fact that we live in an epoch of exploitation and seeming chaos, there is a good God who is coming to redeem this world, right? That is the job of the Christian, and that is the telos of the Christian life, to enjoy and glorify this God and to speak and celebrate and worship the God who has come to unbreak the brokenness. All right? Now, Marlow is looking for the same thing, very similar to the Pilgrim in Inferno. But, as we already saw, Marlow, the distinctly modern pilgrim, right, very much like modern secular culture, has lost its faith in these revelations. They are outdated. They didn't come true. They weren't right. We've lost our faith. Okay? So Clotho, the second fate that spins this individual's experiences into something meaningful, right? Which for the Christian would be, right, the revelations of God that spins your experience into something meaningful. Right? It illuminates the darkness of the tapestry of your life. It gives you purpose. It gives you meaning. Right? If that isn't there, okay, well, what is? Where do we go? What do we look to? Right? Well, for Marlow, increasingly, as he is looking for an idea at the back of his life, something to believe in, all right? As he is looking for that, he increasingly comes to believe that it is embodied by Kurtz, a kind of modern messianic figure, a kind of son of the gods, a man who is good and does what is good and is honest and has integrity and therefore is worth following and worth emulating and worth living like and living even for. Okay? So Kurtz becomes, in this sense, this kind of modern Messiah figure that Marlow increasingly it puts his hope in and desires to know. All right? So in light of this sort of symbolic role that Kurtz begins to play in Marlow's pilgrimage, right, the quote-unquote real significance of Marlow's resurrection of the steamship begins to make more sense. All right? So he talks about the fact that when he arrives in the central station back on 69, that he finds that his steamer is at the, quote, bottom of the river, that it's that this vehicle, right, what is the steamship going to do? It's a vehicle that's going to take him to Kurtz. It's the way that Marlow is going to arrive at this life worth living, this man who holds and reveals a kind of truth, a kind of idea that he lives for and that Marlow wants to live for as well. Okay? He's this kind of torchbearer. But the vehicle that's going to get him there is at the bottom of the river. Now, again, consider, for example, the more traditional Christian model of the pilgrimage, right? What is the vehicle? Who gets you to knowledge of God? Who gets you to the revealed incarnate Christ and knowledge of the revealed incarnate Christ? What gets you there? Well, God does, right? God himself draws you to himself by incarnating himself, right? If we were just left right here and God didn't reveal himself, okay, then we would just be left in chaos, exploitation, injustice, and fallenness, right? We got the world that we chose, and now, despite the fact that we long for a different world, a better world, a coherent world, we get the one that we chose, and therefore we live here, and it's just dark, and we die, and we're cursed, okay? God reveals himself. In other words, God is the power behind, all right, the primary worker behind his own revelation, okay? Unlike that, the modern pilgrim, Marlow, right, referencing, okay, the missing third fate, or Clotho, right, Marlow has to resurrect or pull the steamship, the vehicle that is going to get him to Kurtz, out of the bottom of the river and make it seaworthy himself. It was a wreck, and his job, his work as the modern pilgrim is to get himself to Kurtz, where he and Kurtz together, both of whom are just men, by the way, right? Kurtz is not like, he's like a son of the gods, he's like a Messiah figure, he's like a Christ figure, but he's a distinctly modern one. He isn't actually God, he's a man. And so he, like Kurtz, is going to have to arrive at an understanding of the good and a moral code that is true, that is worth living for on his own strength or by his own navigational skills as he struggles upriver, okay, toward Kurtz, steaming towards meaning, towards a life that is genuinely, truly good and meaningful, all right? It is his job, the modern pilgrim's job, to pull that wrecked steamship out from the depths, okay? So again, the depths here of the river, or the ocean depths that these ships, all right, notice all throughout the course of the novella, there's this motif of ships, right? The story itself is being told on board a ship, the Nelly, which floats above this kind of symbolic chaos or void, right? So think about the beginning of all things in Genesis, right? What does God do? He establishes a distinction between the firmament, all right, the earth, and the oceans and the skies, and he gives the void a kind of dimensions. He establishes meaning, boundaries. Okay, and in that same way, the firmament, that is this man-made ship, this man-made firmament that you can stand on the deck of, all right, and that separates you from the sort of symbolic chaos of the river's depths or the ocean's depths, right? The thing that separates you from that is, again, your ship. And when Marlow arrives, that ship is in that symbolic chaos, and he is the one who has to, by his own strength, muscle it back up, make it seaworthy, bind it together with his rivets, and steam upriver to Kurtz. Okay? That, in other words, Marlow must arrive at Kurtz, must arrive at a life worth living on his own strength. Okay. Later on page 72, right, he describes this process resurrecting it. He sticks to it day and he sticks to it at night. He does it constantly. It is his work. It is his job. It is the only thing that gives him a reprieve from the incomprehensibility and incoherency of all of the rest that he sees. Okay, he sticks to his salvage day and night, night and day, waiting to be able to go and rescue the ill Kurtz, the man who is honest, the good man who knows why he works, knows why he lives, knows why he toils. All right? So that is all that we have today. All right? I just want to impress those 2 points on you. Okay? First and foremost, Marlow begins to conceive of Kurtz as a kind of messianic or modern Christ figure that is an incarnation or a revelation of an idea, a truly good thing to live for. An ideal is what we typically would call it, okay? And that Marlow believes his work, his primary work, in resurrecting this, quote, sunken steamer, okay, as a metaphor or a symbol of his distinctly modern pilgrimage, in which he, very much like Kurtz himself, is going to have to dig up a meaningful life from the depths of an otherwise chaotic world. He is going to have to redeem himself and get to Kurtz by his own strength and will. All right? This is a kind of belief system that is associated with a philosophy, a modern philosophy called existentialism. Okay? So, Marlow, the existentialist modern pilgrim, seeking moral enlightenment from a paragon, a kind of hero, a kind of emissary of pity and of science and of progress, the magnanimous Kurtz. All right? That is all we have for today. Hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.